So thanks so much. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all, wherever you are. Thanks very much for joining this session, Map Your City's Future, a Spatial Data for Resilience workshop. And thanks as well to GFDR Labs and to the Understanding Risk organizers for hosting us. I'll just mention really quickly to those who haven't heard yet that we do have simultaneous translation ongoing. And that'll be true both for the plenary sessions, such as we're in now, and for the breakout rooms, which we'll go into a bit later and explain in the upcoming few minutes. So my name is Ross Eisenberg. I am an urban planner, and I work with the World Bank City Resilience Program, which is a global program that supports cities to help them understand their climate and disaster risks and translate them
dans l'atténuation des catastrophes naturelles, dans le plan par rapport à la résilience et par rapport à la finance, au côté financier de ce qui accompagne ces gestions de risque. J'ai Pablo avec moi, Fabio et mes collègues, Pierre également, qui est avec nous.
And I'm delighted today to introduce this session. So the way that this is going to run is that I'm going to quickly introduce the City Resilience Program and the City Scan product that we have developed, and which this workshop is based around. And then I will hand the mic over to Grace, who will introduce her Open Cities program and provide more detail, a bit more detail than this what is shown on the slide about the timing of the workshop and some technical aspects to keep in mind throughout. And then Fabio will provide a short demo of the workshop exercise, and I will run a few polling questions during that time. All of that should take no more than 25 minutes, and then we will break out into 3 separate breakout rooms, each of which corresponds to the 3 different cities, Banjul in Gambia, Cap-Haitien in Haiti, and Douala in Cameroon. We will actually sort of run the game that Fabio demonstrates. And then after 1 hour there, we will all come back to the main room, and then we can have a whole group discussion with all of us who are in the room. I currently see 37 participants. Have a discussion across all 3 cities around what we learned. I should also mention that you do not have to be a delegate from one of these 3 cities. You can be coming from any place, and we'll still participate and get a lot of value out of it. So let me first give a quick introduction to the City Resilience Program. The CRP was established in June of 2017 within the World Bank's Urban Disaster Risk Management, Resilience, and Land Global Practice. And there were founding and ongoing donor partners, including the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, the European Commission, Spanish Agency for International Development Cooperation, the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, Austrian Ministry of Finance, the Resilient City Development Program, and the World Bank Group more broadly. And our purpose is to empower cities to invest in climate and disaster resilience. And we do this mainly by finding ways to help integrate climate change and disaster risk into cities' upstream capital investment planning. And also by helping cities to access the considerable and specific finance that's needed in order for climate smart investments to succeed. So our 3 pillars are planning for resilience, finance for resilience, and partnerships for resilience. And I, along with my colleague Stephen Rubini, represent the planning side. So far, CRP, we've engaged in over 100 cities around the world through various channels. And one of those channels is through a product that we developed, which is called the City Scan. So City Scans are a teaching tool that we produce that essentially survey the key characteristics and resilience-related conditions of an urban area and help to bring out the interaction between a city's natural and built environments, especially with respect to climate and disasters. And that it helps to move the discussion to opportunities and actions for infrastructure investments for municipal officials to take that actually incorporate what the conditions on the ground are and the prioritizations and trade-offs necessary for a city's project portfolio. Let me just touch briefly on where these data are coming from. So we derive about 50 different layers from all of this wide variety of the best and most authoritative sources available at the global level for urban climate and disaster data. So when we apply this to a particular city, it's not necessarily going to be the best available data for that particular city or the most granular available data or the most up-to-date available data. But that's okay, and this is intentional. And that's because the entire purpose is to really drive conversations and build consensus around priorities and actions. And we can do this quickly and cheaply and use the results to then support some deeper, more extensive analysis into specific hazards or different areas, let's say. So just in the interest of providing a flavor and in the interest of time, what you'll see in Fabio's upcoming demo and in the breakout rooms is just a snapshot of a selection, a few handful of the city scans layers. And overall, our hopes from the breakout rooms and the discussions that follow is that this will really help break down thinking along particular sector needs like transport or water or waste that we often can tend to get very focused on, and then to promote some more cross-sectoral thinking along, across these different areas around which our cities are organized. And so that at the session will help highlight the interaction of the different urban forces in some new ways, and that it will help to create some new perspectives on opportunities and locations for investments, and those that are particularly focused on climate and disaster resilience and where those can take place. So just with that preview, I will now hand it over to Grace, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Ross. I won't take too much time, but I just wanted to, and Ross, you will be controlling the slides. If you could move on to the next one. I just wanted to briefly let everyone know about the Open Cities program, which is an initiative between the World Bank and the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, and with local governments. So it's a collaboration that allows local governments and communities to improve spatial data for urban resilience. If you could move to the next slide. Okay, thank you. So briefly stated, Open Cities is an urban resilience initiative, and it's working to build the capacity of youth and local institutions and local communities to collect and use open spatial data to improve disaster management and urban planning in their cities. So what we do is the World Bank works in close collaboration with local governments, whether they be municipalities or city councils or local development agencies, and in implementing consortium, such as tech firms or universities or the OpenStreetMap community. And everyone convenes together to collect data, especially mappable data on buildings and other lifeline infrastructure, and to develop the right tools and products to use this data more effectively. If you could move to the next slide. And so Open Cities is really about not just about collecting risk data, but also convening and strengthening the relationships of local organizations and local stakeholders within cities, and building the capacity of these various networks to collect better data, more precise data, and more open source and collaboratively shared data. And so we work with, I've mentioned already that we work with a local government who helps to decide the resilience challenge that will be addressed. For example, in many cities in Africa, we focused on urban flooding and how that affects informal settlements and other slum communities. It could be about landslides or earthquake risk. We've often also focused on specifically drainage and how that affects, how solid waste management practices can affect things like flooding. And we, the local government civil servants are not only the deciders of the broader scope of the program, but they also get trained in on many of the same technologies and skills that that the local mappers are trained in on. So there are workshops and educational modules on things like, you know, the latest open source technologies for mapping, drone imagery capture, etc. Additionally, the community itself, universities and the communities themselves receive training and the opportunity to help map their community and to contribute to, for example, the data model of what aspects of their community are important to capture. If you could move to the next slide. So Open Cities is has been developing in Africa, and we've also had a few engagements in South Asia. But if you are at all interested in learning more about this program and opportunities that we might have opening up in Latin America and the Caribbean, please do reach out to the emails that you see here on the screen. That we have firm developments happening in St. Lucia, Dominica, and Kingston, Jamaica. But we are also exploring other opportunities in perhaps Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean, as well as other cities in sub-Saharan Africa, of which there are many. That's it on Open Cities. I just wanted to say before we start the session, I wanted to remind everyone that we do have interpreters available. So if you are an English speaker and you know that you want to join one of the French-speaking rooms, such as Douala and Cap-Haïtien, please do click on the interpretation button at the bottom right of your screen and click on English, so that anytime a French speaker speaks, an interpreter will interpret that to you into English. The reverse is the case for our Francophone colleagues. And perhaps I could get Pierre quickly just to make sure, in case anyone has not yet connected to that room. Pierre, if you could just let our Francophone colleagues know in
Que
French.
vous pourriez informer nos collègues en français?
Oui, donc juste pour vous assurer, enfin, je pense que la question était pour moi. Donc, alors, j'ai effectivement maintenant, il faut que je sur off. Donc voilà, là je parle en français, et donc pour les personnes qui sont anglophones, je pense qu'elles ont la traduction. Donc c'est un moyen pour nous de tester que ça fonctionne bien. Moi je serai notamment dans la salle Cap-Haïtien, et j'en profite pour me présenter. Donc Pierre Schranowski, je suis collègue de Grèce, Ross, Fabio, et je travaille aussi avec le GFDRA.
Thank you, Pierre. I also wanted to mention, I just wanted to check to make sure we have. So the schedule of the session, I just wanted to mention one more time for anyone who has just joined. There is a spreadsheet in the chat, and I will reshare it here. Sorry, it's actually difficult to speak while listening to the interpretation. I will reshare this spreadsheet in the chat. The spreadsheet allows you to add your name to the city room, the city breakout room that you would like to participate in. So I encourage especially our government delegates to make sure that their name is associated with the correct room. But additionally, if there are any participants who are not from one of the cities in the session, you're also free to choose which room you'd like to participate in. Thanks. I think that's everything, Ross. So I think I'm passing it over to Fabio at this point.
Thank you, Grace. So welcome.
Yes, awesome.
Also from my side. Thanks, Ross, for that. So I will try to. So first of all, my name is Fabio Chan. I'm an Earth observation geospatial analysis expert and disaster risk management specialist working for the World Bank. I'm going to illustrate you the tool we are going to use in the breakout sessions. So let me share my screen quickly, and then we can start showing you. So you should now see my screen. We are going to use this tool based on basically Google Maps. So I hope that most of you are already familiar with Google Maps. So it's very similar. We have one tool for each of the cities. So this one, in this case, you are seeing the one for Douala. And so you see here the base map. So it's basically Google Maps for Douala. So you can recognize the city and the streets and so on. On top of this background map, we can show different layers of information. And you can see them here on the right-hand side. There's a pop-up window that opens when you put your mouse on top of it. And we can see a different set of layers that appears here. And we have the possibility to activate or deactivate them just by clicking here. So in each of the room, the facilitator is going to show the map to you, but you can also open it yourself in your browser. You're going to share the link in a minute in the chat box. So when we activate one layer, like in this case, I activated the first layer, which has just the name of the city. You can see that a red outline appeared in the map, and this is showing the area we selected for analyzing Douala. So where all the layers, the different information has been produced. I can also activate another layer. In this case, layer number 2 is population. So you see that here a map appeared on top of the base map. And each pixels in this map is showing population. You have a legend on the left-hand side of your screen. So you can see in this case for population, values go from 0 to 180. And so when you have yellow pixels, it means we have 0 or very few people in that pixel. And then on the opposite side, when we have red pixels, it means we have about 180 people per pixel. We can zoom in the map and you can actually see the information more precisely. And so you can see the different colors for pixel, meaning that each pixel has a different number of people in it. If you go back here on the layers window, you see there's a slider here on the right, and I can use that to play with the transparency of the layers. So in this way, we are allowed to see what we have in the background. In this case, I have the map, but I can also switch to satellite. As you can see here on the right, we have map or satellite. If I click on satellite, satellite images appears here. So I can play with the slider and see what there is behind the population information. So now I can go back and zoom out a little bit to see more of the city. I can deactivate the population, and now I can activate urban areas. So this layer here, number 3, showing urban areas as they were detected in 1975. In this case, I don't need the legend to understand. It's just a binary mask, meaning that wherever you find colored pixels, it means that we have urban areas. Wherever it's transparent, of course, we don't have any information. So there's no urban areas detected for that year. The following 3 layers are basically the same thing, but for different years. So for example, layer 3.2, urban 1990, is showing the urban areas that has been detected between 1975 and 1990. And you can see in this case, it's the orange pixels. You can play with the slider so you can see the difference. So basically the city from 1975 to 1990 has been detected to expand in this way, as you can see. The same thing is with urban 2000. We have the expansion of urban areas until the year 2000, and the same thing for urban 2050. So in this way, you're able to see how the city has been growing and modifying from 1975 to 2015. Next layer, it's land cover. So this is a land cover map showing each pixel is showing how the land is covered. So in different categories, you see different colors. The legend on the left-hand side is showing you what the color means. In this case, you can see mainly red areas, which are built-up areas. You can see here on the left. Then we have a lot of yellow pixels. These are croplands, and so on. You can see the different values in the legend here on the left. So now I go quickly through the other layers. So I think you have started to understand how this is working. Layer number 5 is green spaces. It's a binary mask. Also in this case, every pixel is showing where green spaces have been detected. Nighttime lights, it's showing the intensity of nighttime lights as it has been detected by the satellite. And you can see the scale bar here on the left. So the more yellow the pixel is, the more intensity in the nighttime lights we have. The next two layers are river flood, like you can see in this case, which is a modeling of how river flood can occur in the city. Number 8, it's a rainwater flood. So it's the same thing, but for rainwater. So not only for river flooding. So you can see it's more widespread throughout the city because this is how flood can occur due to rainwater. The scale bar for flood, it's here on the left. The more white the pixels, the less water depth we have. Instead, towards the blue, the water depth is increasing up to 3 meters. So it means whenever we have a flood of this intensity, we can have areas with 3 meters of water depth. Layer number 10, it's a road network criticalities. In this case, you can see that the layer it's a bit slow to load because it's a big data set. So don't worry if you see that it's a bit slow to load. In this case, roads are appearing with different thickness and with different color. The more thick the road is, the more important it is in the road network for the city you are looking at. And the same thing applies for the color. The more red the road is, the more important it is in the road network. To give you an example, I zoom here in the bridge connecting the two sides of Douala City. Imagine if we interrupt the bridge, so the bridge collapsed for any reason, the two parts of the cities, the one here on the upper left and the bottom right, are completely disconnected. That means that this connection here, this road, is very important in the road network of the city, because if this is affected, basically we disconnect two big parts of the network. So this applies similarly also to other connections. So you see here, for example, very small roads. You barely see them because they are very pale red. These are roads that are not very much important in the road network because they are not connecting so many segments of the network. So this information can, for example, tell you something about when flood is occurring, how this is affecting the road network of your city. And the last 4 layers are critical infrastructure in the city. They appear as points with different symbols. So we see in red fire station, in green health facilities, and in blue we have police stations, and pink we have schools. So these allow you to see in your city where all these facilities are located, and so you can, for example, assess how many of them are affected in case a flood is occurring in that area. The very last thing I'm showing you, it's how we are going to run the exercise. So we are going to ask you to activate certain layers. Again, the facilitator is showing you the screen, but you can do the same in your screen with the link I'm sharing in a minute. So in this case, the example is overlay the city boundary, which is the first layer with the name of the city, and the layer urban 1975. So the questions are, what does this show? Is the city center already defined? How would you characterize the shape of the city? So we will use the breakout session to go through these questions and allow you to look at the data and say what you think what are the meaning of this data that you are seeing on the screen. So I think I covered all the content of the tools. I will share them in the chat box right now. And if you have any questions, I'm here. And over to you, Grace.
Wonderful. Thank you, Fabio. So at this point, I'll allow Fabio some time to add the links to the chat box. Please do click on those links if you want to follow along. But again, as Fabio said, we will have a facilitator sharing their screen and working with the interactive map on your behalf. At this time, I'm going to start adding people to the breakout rooms. This is the first time I've facilitated a Zoom call that has breakout rooms, so forgive me if there's any technical issues, but I believe if you have Zoom installed and you're using the application, then you can choose which room to go into. If I see that anybody has not chosen their own room, then I'll try to choose your room based on the spreadsheet that I shared earlier. So allow me just a minute to create the rooms, and then we will begin the workshop. Forgive me, everyone. I just need to ask for our technical session support to help me with designing the breakout rooms. I've created the rooms, but now I see that I have to assign everyone myself. Is it true that if we do it manually, then I'm in charge of assigning everyone a room, or is it possible to have people assign themselves to a room?
My understanding is you have to assign them.
Okay. All right, everyone, it's just going to take me a few minutes here to add all the names to the rooms. So please forgive us for the slight. I guess this could be treated as a coffee break if we weren't doing a virtual session. I'll add now the spreadsheet just one more time in case you didn't put your name down already. Otherwise, just wait a moment and we'll get you into a room. Thanks. Hello, if you are still in this main room, it is because we didn't have your name assigned to a specific city. So if you could use the spreadsheet that's in the chat and assign yourself a city, that would be great. If you do not, I'll assign you randomly. So hopefully we assign you correctly. Thank you.
Okay, very well. Okay, I think we can start. So as I explained earlier, this is the map for Banjul. Here on the right, we have several layers of informations that we can activate and deactivate. Each one of them are showing different information for the city. The idea of this exercise is to show you how we can use geospatial information to understand how our city is composed, how the city is exposed to risk, where people are, how the city has been evolving in time, where built-up areas are, and so on. As Ross was explaining at the beginning, this doesn't mean these layers, these data are the best available out there. They are reliable data sets that can be used for a scan of the city. So to assess very quickly and as precise as possible the situation in your city. So that means that we can find also better data out there with the same information, but for the purpose of the city scan, these layers have been selected. Yeah, I think we can start. So I'm going to show you the layers again. Then we go through the questions that I was showing before, and I will ask you to say what you think about this, to reply to the questions. I invite Fatou and Eliman to help me describing the situation of the city. So
Hello, everyone in this room. So sorry for the technical difficulties. We're almost done moving you to different rooms, but please do write your name on the spreadsheet if you haven't already so that I can add you to the right room. We should be almost ready to begin. Thank you.
Hi, Grace, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Can you bring us back to the main
I'm
room?
trying.
Okay. If not, you may just have to re-enter it and just tell everyone to leave and give them the specific instructions.
Yes.
Hi, Grace. It's Steve. What do we need to do here?
What we want to do is we want to dissolve the Duala room and move all of them into the main room because that's the only way that interpretation will work.
So back into the main room, and that's without the, yes, okay. So we can, okay. We can broadcast a message to this room and just get everyone to jump out. Hello, this is Steve from the technical support. Can everyone leave this meeting room, please, to come back to the main room? And if anyone's able to translate that, that'd be fantastic.
So just to clarify, you want everyone to leave the room? This is the interpreter.
Yes, Grace has just asked us to come back because the interpretation isn't working in this space and we need to do the interpretation for this session. So you need to come to the main room for the interpretation.
Okay, I understand.
And then Steve, I also need to move a few more people into rooms that are in the main room right now that need to go into Duala or Capuchin. You're muted.
I've just asked everyone from Duala to come back into the main room so they can use interpretation.
Great.
Yep. Okay.
Then could you make me the host again so that I could finish?
Absolutely. No problem. No problem. So the presentation that was in Douala space, in a Douala breakout, if that can continue now in the main room, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So I understand now that we're all sort of back here, the Douala people, the Douala contingent, and that the translation is working. So again, on behalf of everyone, sorry for the technical challenges. We're, have slightly less time, but there's still a good amount of breathing room for us to have a hopefully engaging discussion. Again, thanks everyone for joining
notre discussion. Donc, merci encore une fois d'être avec nous. Merci.
Session. I'm an urban planner. I work as a disaster risk management consultant with the City Resilience Program of the World Bank. So this session that Fabio introduced, just the idea to start some conversations and see how spatial information overlaying it one after the other can sort of lend new insight into some of the resilience conditions on the ground and hopefully lead to some conversations around potential future investments.
Of places, especially in the tropics, so around the equator, in between the tropics, because of the cloud coverage. So we know that tropical areas are, for a long period of the year, they are covered by clouds, and the satellite back in the time wasn't flying very frequently.
To open it up and follow along on your own computer and your own machine. I think my main role here is really very much as a facilitator. It's to do as good of a job as I can to get a conversation flowing between everyone else. So we have a few set questions here, but I'll just start off by showing we're going to overlay the city boundary with the layer from 1975. And the initial questions here, what are your initial impressions? How well has the city center been defined, and how would you characterize its shape? So anyone can feel free to please just unmute yourself and come in.
Thank you. This is Mark Harewood. I was going to say, for me, I see two key areas. There is start with the small bit. There is a small westerly area on the other side of the river to the main town, but the main town or the city centre itself seems to be in what you might describe as a rectangle. Going from the southwest towards the northeast, and the highest concentration would appear to be in the southerly end of that. Looking at the urban density from what we can see, it doesn't.
Yes. Thanks very much, Mark. Yep. So yeah, this is just sort of an intro question to get us going, and I think that's an accurate description. Maybe I'll just add that, especially for if there's anyone, for those who are coming from the city, from Douala, the aim here is not necessarily just to identify or to trace the official urban boundary, but to show, when we're thinking about the whole city in general. So that would just include the whole urbanized area. So this boundary here may not match up entirely to what you, to the official boundary, but we think this is a valuable way of showing kind of overall interaction with the surrounding areas. So why don't I, just move to the next one. So when we layer in the rest of the built up area. So we have 4 different measures, the way showing how the urban area has changed over time from 1975 all the way to 2015. So if anyone would like to come in and comment, some initial starting off questions, or how has Douala grown since 1975? Where's there room for it to grow next? As urbanization is still expanding in the city, and what are if anyone, especially from the city, can comment, how is the city thinking about managing that urbanization given this context?
Ross, can you check the chat box, please?
Sure. Okay, I'll share that message with Grace. Just returning to the Douala section. Are there any ideas or thoughts? Sure. Mark.
I apologize if I'm doing the talking. I'll describe what I see. There certainly on the westerly, smaller unit, there has been a much greater intensification and sprawl and spreading out of the urban development. And in what you might describe as the main part of the town, there are two things that I can see. One is the development towards the northeast and lesser development out towards the southeast. But what there's also been is a large degree of infill in between properties, which for a future suggests that this is no longer available. And that's useful too. And you start seeing how much infill is possible, and the intensity has grown, which then suggests that this high density area may produce certain other problems that we recognize from many other cities with high urban densities. But for the future, it would suggest that this intensification will move towards the southeast, perhaps, or over towards the more northerly regions, being the free areas. However, I know nothing about this city.
Moins dense, mais je ne connais absolument rien de cette ville, donc je ne sais pas si c'est une région de la ville qui est prône au.
Nothing can be built there. It may be valuable farmland. I don't know. And it's not very helpful to build all your buildings on your most valuable farmland, and it creates other problems. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, precisely. We'll get to some of the flooding questions in a minute. We don't have all the data about where the valuable farmland is, but these are just sort of conversation starters. But I think the points about infill development happening in the city center are well taken, and it raises the question: okay, why haven't they happened in sort of some of these areas? Maybe these are steep sloping, for example, or ravines, or some other issue. Maybe some areas to sort of build in more over here. But yeah, maybe there's other reasons why we need to sort of prevent sprawl or think about ways of managing this growth. Also, of course, further up north, more of a natural area that is currently unbuilt. So there's questions around there. Okay, how to balance the need for conservation versus perhaps needs for burgeoning expansion. So yeah, again, I'm not sure exactly if folks are in the room from Douala, but again, feel free to chime in with your perspective. But in the meantime, we can perhaps go to the next one. Yeah, let's see. So this is on green spaces. Sort of start an analysis. We can take this off for now. And so this is a layer of the green spaces that we find throughout the city area. You know, my initial impression is just that how there's a stark dearth of green spaces really throughout the main urbanized area. Very little sense of parks or open green spaces, really just appearing on the outskirts. So curious, you know, sort of that addresses sort of the first question: where in the city has the highest and lowest concentrations? But wondering if folks, especially perhaps from the city, have any ideas on what the effects of this might be, and how to think about some new and more green spaces for this city. And we can also just layer in some, sort of see how it overlaps here. Okay. Well, perhaps this one is a bit self-evident. But again, yeah, sort of the purpose is just to show that, you know, there's very little that can be seen throughout, which, you know, could be a big issue for the city. You know, there's a lot of consequences when it comes to green spaces in terms of urban heat, which can be an issue here, in terms of health, social engagement, and that sort of thing. So just in the interest of time, maybe we'll just move on. Yeah. So we have a layer that shows the activity of nighttime, the nighttime lights in the city. And so what this is a measure of, it takes in, it's a satellite that takes in the total emissions of nighttime lights from 2013 to 2019, and provides a measure for their the slope of change, meaning the extent to which they've increased or decreased. And the reason this is interesting is that nighttime lights in the literature have found to be more or less a proxy for economic activity. So it can give a good indication of areas that have the most and the least, and the most increasing and decreasing economic activity. So applying a spatial lens to some economic data. So can anyone comment sort of on which parts of the city experienced a positive change in nighttime lights? And is any of that surprising?
Paul Eccleston here. I suppose the growth to the north and east of the city isn't that surprising, in that it matches the growth of the city over time. What's quite surprising to me is maybe the increase along the waterfront near to the city centre. Maybe that's due to a regeneration of the waterfront, or yeah, it'd be interesting to know what's driving new activity there, because it's close to the more established city centre.
Certainly.
And I think the very bright one, I think, is that maybe a football stadium, the one down there? Yeah.
Let's see.
Perhaps the other thing to think about is the area which has become dark. It was the original urban center of the city, and if light is a proxy for economic activity, it suggests that this has become the poorest center of the city, which leaves you with many other problems, that that you've actually had urban degeneration rather than
right. Yeah, so I should stress that what we're showing, we could show another layer that shows the sort of the sum or the total of the nighttime light emissions as an indication of economic activity. This is not quite that. This is showing the change over time to really highlight the areas that have most increased from the way they were beforehand. So I think just to echo what you said, this clearly shows that compared to the city center hasn't had much of an increase in its nighttime lights. But if we want to pinpoint where in the city, but it's still possible that there is quite a lot of it happening here. But so just to pinpoint where there's been an increase compared to other places, you can point out here and along the waterfront as mentioned. But it is interesting, because we do see in other cities that their city centers still have an increase in activity, while at the same time as other places on the outskirts are growing as well. So I agree, this is an interesting finding for the downtown.
Est-ce qu'il y a pas une question à ce niveau-là? Je voudrais peut-être, je suis Stéphane Buncha de la communauté urbaine de Douala. Et je voulais quand même dire que il y a certaines remarques que je pense qu'on
It's just a
pourrait faire.
comment that I wanted to make about this, because we're in the city right now.
Vous m'entendez?
So
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I'm not sure if the interpretation is set up correctly.
Can you hear me now? I should be.
Grace, are you able to help with that?
Désolé, est-ce que vous pouvez répéter la question?
Disons que j'avais un commentaire et une question. J'ai d'abord une question. La lumière jaune, la lumière jaune telle que c'est planté sur l'image, est-ce que ça montre la progression ou alors c'est pris à un instant T en 2014, comme vous l'avez dit? Parce que si c'est la progression, ça peut avoir une interprétation différente de l'image prise à un instant T. Maintenant, mon commentaire, c'est de dire que le centre ancien n'est pas devenu plus pauvre, comme on a semblé peut-être vouloir le dire. Mais il est possible qu'au moment où on a pris la photo satellitaire, que le centre urbain n'ait pas fait l'objet de réhabilitation, ou alors il y avait plus de courant. Il n'y a pas d'énergie à ce moment-là.
Town at that moment, or the electricity was off at that moment. That was the comment that I wanted to make.
That was a little advanced for me. Have you clicked on the globe and specifically clicked on English in the interpretation?
Let's see. I may have to exit my screen share in order to see that, because I don't see that anywhere.
Hi,
I can
Ross.
hear the English. I can hear the English channel until Ross figures that part out. If you want to tell me he can't hear you, but I can hear you. If you wanted to give an interpretation of what the question was, and then I can just repeat you. Yeah.
All right. Why don't I just stop my sharing for just a moment? Apologies, and see if I'll be able to. See.
Okay, so I'd say, you heard that?
Yes, got it.
Okay, got it.
Apologies for that. Thanks very much. Yeah, good question. So this is a measure of the change over time. So it's showing the slope of the change. So in the nighttime light emissions since 2013 until 2019. So that's why it's a measure of this recent change in economic activity from start to for the past 7 or 8 years. And then, yeah, in terms of the what it's actually measuring, it's really a total measure of any kind of light that's been emitted. So the satellite is capturing if it's a dark night and you go outside into a yard and you take a flashlight and shine it up in the sky, it will capture that. And so it captures the total light emitted, and then we then apply a measure on top of that to measure the change from over the time. So I hope that answered the question. Yeah, so anyway, so I think we can maybe move on just in the interest of time, but some interesting thoughts on this one. Perhaps there's been some waterfront development while the rest of the city has more or less stayed in terms of its more similar economic activity over time. So now let's move on to one of the issues that was brought up earlier about flooding. So for anyone who's from the city, curious to hear if your impression is that rainwater or river flooding is more of an issue in your current planning. You can see here, this is just from the flooding hazard model. The river floods. This is sort of where they're affecting the city, or where they have the greatest potential to affect the city. Whereas the rainwater floods are a bit more prevalent. So curious, especially for those who are from the city, if how you consider the management of this hazard, or of these two hazards. Or if anyone else has any thoughts, please chime in.
Je vais quand même me lancer.
So I'll give it a try. I'm a specialist in drainage issues, and I don't have the right image for me to explain to you, because I have to indicate on the map the regions that are targeted and that I'm really talking about. So it's not really obvious with this map, but I can tell you that globally speaking, as we see this map, the sewage area is affected by a river. The river Rouvi separates the city in two. And so it's difficult to join the two sections of the city. And there's an audio problem. So there's several watersheds in the city. There are about 10 watersheds within the city that take the water from the rivers. What is clear is that there are sewage problems which are created by different issues and drainage issues, whether these are natural areas or whether it comes from the rain. Recently, we've had a specific problem recently. We've had a combination of two problems, the high level of the rivers and abundant rains. So all of this together, which has prevented water from draining to reach the rivers.
And so the waters ended in the terrain. And so we had significant flooding in 2020. So this was a very recent event. We believe that this type of event is difficult to avoid or to prevent because they are related to a natural event. Those are the limits of the city, and we really can't unbuild the city. At the level of the sea, there are issues. So if if the sea level rises by 1 meter or 2 meters, as was the case in August, it is most likely that we will end up with water on the ground. And so that's what I can say as far as when I'm looking at the map. But if I could get the arrow, I could point to exactly what I'm saying, but I can't in any way. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's some really helpful and great context. The question that leads next for me, and perhaps others have thoughts as well, is sort of where, where specifically are the drainage issues most prevalent? And so, this is sort of just the hazard model showing where floods are likely to occur, but in some cases the floods may drain quickly. So then, in terms of pinpointing and highlighting where the drainage issues are worst, and then also kind of how, there was mention of the management aspects of it. So how do you think about managing, as you mentioned, the sea level rise and the drainage issues, and going about making those decisions on where and how to invest?
Bonsoir et merci.
Good evening, and thank you. If you allow me, I am Frank Eric Nara, and I would like to try to add to what my colleague just said. I would like to mention that once again, what you need to understand about this city is that the terrain is quite flat. It is almost at sea level, as he mentioned. And so this means that in terms of investments for drainage, they have to be quite large. And we are faced with a difficulty. We need to make sure that there is enough of a slope to drain water. So in the city center, there is a high concentration of water. And during the different studies, we needed to identify the connection areas in order to drain water. And also the ways out for the water are rare. And so it is a complex process. As I mentioned, it is flat, and there is a great need for investment to drain water. And so we did have an event that of a magnitude that we had never known before. And so we need to study what we need to do in order to avoid this type of situation. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful context, and really adds to the challenge in the city. Would Samsidi like to chime in? Okay, so we can move on with some of the more, some of the other sort of layering layers, or layering exercises along using these, the flooding. So if we just, one idea is to sort of layer in the population into the flood zones to sort of highlight, in addition to the natural aspect, sort of where population is most exposed to flooding. So for example, just to start out with the river floods, this gets at a point that was made earlier about building in flooding zones. So I think you can see here that especially, the river flood zones, sort of oftentimes where a lot of the population and building has stopped. But this is, when I look at this, I see especially, some population density here in this area, and notably in this newer area where a lot of the population built up area is much more exposed to the river floods. So this is one aspect. And then similarly for the rainwater, which is much more of a prevalent issue, affecting a lot of the newer developments in the eastern part of the city, especially in these big areas here. So yeah, curious to see if this brings up any other related comments or thoughts. So yeah, just to note that the densest parts over here certainly are exposed to both the river and rainwater flooding aspects. Okay, just a few more in the interest of time. We can run a similar type of overlay with the built-up area. So I think this is useful just to show how keeping the flooding layer constant over time, we can sort of see how the city has grown and built up more and more into kind of a flood risk zone. Again, has sort of avoided this in the northern area, but when we go back to 1975, much less, avoiding this significant rainwater flood zone here, especially along this area, and down here too. But given the urbanization and development pressures over time, certainly those have been, less. The pressures have sort of won out, it seems. So does anyone want to comment on this part in terms of which time period was most of the exposed area, the area that's most exposed to flooding was built?
It looks a lot like a lot of it is quite recent, and that's, I guess that's not uncommon if you have high pressure for growth and for space to build, and if there isn't the possibility to regulate where people build, so if there isn't, say, zoning in flood risk areas.
Yeah, would anyone like to chime in on the zoning aspects in terms of how and to what extent this exists in Douala for managing construction and siting of different buildings in different places?
I just wanted to add something. I would like to basically confirm what Mr. Macros just said in terms of the different zones, the different flood risk zones. Yes, there is a demographic pressure due to the demographic growth in the area in Douala. The population started to settle in these areas, and progressively they have to settle in these flood risk areas. And this is something that we can feel more as time grows, as the map shows, especially on the left bank, on the other side of the bridge. And then also on the other bank, on the right, I think that there is a lot of pressure And the population just started to settle in an anarchic manner, informal manner, without any regulation or a legal framework. The populations just started to build in flood risk areas. And that's exactly what you said. There is pressure indeed, and you can see it on the map. It is quite visible. People settle where there should be a natural drainage area. And we are now trying to use the map and to work on the north area, the northern area, to move the population up north so that they settle in areas that are more comfortable and where people, where we are able to control water drainage without any risk to the population. So that's the goal with the installation of 7 kilometers of drainage. Thank you.
Thank you. I see. So, okay, so there's already some investment being planned in drainage to help assist with the new settlements in these areas, given the potential, given the pressures. Okay.
There is another question as to whether they would regulate how, what sort of construction is carried out, and you can build resilient housing that doesn't flood as soon as you get 10 or 20 centimeters of water, just by not building a cellar and building a platform or a few steps up, and you can avoid a lot of the residential from flooding. There are two aspects: the urban planning and the organization of which type of constructions you're going to permit within those urban planning regions. And I think this is a resilience workshop. We should be thinking about what do solutions look like, and what do they do now? I don't know. This is interesting.
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, I think hopefully we can rely a bit on the representatives from the city, maybe just to chime in again on how you're thinking about you know, to Mark's point about what kinds of construction, and you know, just in addition to perhaps drainage infrastructure, to make for an overall ecosystem of resilience as you deal with these challenges in urbanization. So any other thoughts on managing that and managing that expansion and construction in a resilient way?
Je vous remercie pour la question.
Well, thank you for this question. What I can say is that it is a theme that we've thought about, a topic that we've thought about. We have our urban development plans, and we are working on the regulations. However, I think that with what we just went through on August 20th, where we had to ask this question, the question of what can we do in order to prevent the risks caused by tides, it made us realize that it is necessary to find a solution, because we can have water on the continent at any time. So this is indeed a question that we have mentioned, that is on the table, but that we don't have an answer for yet. But it is important in terms of urban development. It is something that we need to work on over the coming years.
This
is what I can say for now, but I think that this is a central question, because what happened on August 20th makes us think that we have to find a solution. And concerning the type of buildings and the height that we have to impose on buildings, so that we can be prepared for tides and increased water levels.
Yeah, okay, very helpful. Certainly there's, it's more, the story is more complex than what we can show here, of course. There's, in addition to this type of just simple river and rainwater flooding, there's storm surges, tides, just overall sea level rise that really complicates the picture, and a lot of different, and so a deeper understanding of all those risks and can lead to a more nuanced picture of what resilience investments and plans might be needed. So yeah, these are all great things to put on the table, and I'm glad that at least some of this conversation is leading to to some agreement on how we go about thinking about this sort of thing. Maybe just in the interest of time, I'll just continue on for a bit. I think we're already in the main room, but the others I think will be joining back up soon for the plenary wrap up. First, I just want to we'll take away the flood layers, and I'm going to put in this road criticality network that Fabio had introduced. Where is it? There it is. This takes a little bit of time to load, but I'm just going to I'll just explain a little bit what it means. We looked at the entire road network of the city and ran a spatial analysis that determined if you took each road segment and blocked it, let's just say in the event of a natural disaster, for example, which out of all of them would be the ones that had that disrupted the highest percentage of journeys around the road network. So yeah, it generally gives an indication of which roads within the city, within the road network, are most kind of critical to the overall traffic flow of the entire network. So my apologies that this is taking a little while to load. At the very least, you can sort of see those roads that are the most key highlighted in red. And I think this will just take another few minutes or a few seconds for the whole road network to get there. Yeah, I think the first step is to just share this. In my view, it's not so surprising that to see some of these, for example, the bridge that connects two sides of the over the river, to be one of the most critical segments in the city, as are some of these longer streets that connect different neighborhoods. So I would say, first curious, the first question, is this enlightening or illuminating to different extents to see on a map kind of this laid out? And then, we can similarly as before, kind of add in the flooding layers to show the overlap and likelihood potential of these roads getting impacted by some flooding events. So would anyone like to comment on which of the most critical streets are most exposed to these flooding hazards? And does this help kind of to think about planning for disaster contingencies in the transport space?
Alors, oui, merci, je vais intervenir une fois de plus.
Thank you. I will speak up once again. If you look at your map closely, you see N3, that's the national road, N3. And if you look on the west of the city, it's the only road, indeed, that connects the western part of the city where you have the bridge. If there's a natural catastrophe, it will be difficult for people to reach the western side of the city. Right now, we have 2 bridges, and we're planning to build a 3rd and a 4th bridge. So there's nothing specific to say concerning the bridges that will be built. On the eastern part of the city, you have also noted that it's the only way to reach that part of the city. It's the N3 road to the lower right-hand side of the screen. And it's the same road, the N3, which gives access to the city. And if this road were to have problems, it would be very difficult to connect the eastern part of the city of the continent, actually. So for the time being, there is a road which gives access to the city and to exit the city. There are other roads which don't lead to the same point, but there are other ways of connecting when new road projects will be implemented. This is a major road here that for the time being is critical in terms of the working of the city. I think that's enough for me right now. I might have more things to say later.
Bon, je voudrais aussi un peu, juste pour préciser.
Just to clarify something, where you see the bridge over the Voury River, there's the old bridge and there's a new bridge. And both are very close to one another. So there are two bridges. So we have to make a political decision whether we're going to build another bridge further away or a bridge closer to the old bridge and replace the old bridge. But so far, it looks like we're going to decide to build a new bridge next to the old bridge to replace the old bridge before building a third and a fourth bridge. And this will be on the eastern side of the city. I'm sorry, to the north of the city, in the Bonabéry region. So that's what I wanted to say about the bridge, which indeed is critical. If one bridge breaks down, there will be another one. Both bridges are working now and can connect the two sides of the city. Now, coming to the level of water, there's several areas in the city which flood very often when it rains. So there's obstruction. So there are areas where there's flooding, but it's because they're not freed up in time. But right now, there are areas where you can see that this happens often, but we are working on it to broaden some areas so that the water can drain easier. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's been really enlightening. If I may, just for the whole room, I think the other two breakout rooms have concluded. So if you'll indulge me, I'll just wrap up the Duola section. Thanks to everyone for your participation in this really enlightening and illuminating session, especially this last conversation. I think we can clearly see some of the reasons why the bridge has been built where it is, where the land is close to each other, close to one another. But certainly some interesting decisions that will have to be made in terms of balancing the need for this redundancy in the bridge and the entire road network connecting to the eastern part of the country, as well as and balancing the needs for that with the flooding. So I'll just with that I'll say thanks very much, and I'll conclude our sort of Duola breakout room that's been happening in the main room and turn it back over to Fabio and Grace. Thank you.
Thanks, Russ. Thank you, everyone. I think I know that Fabio needs to jump out a little bit early for another session that he's facilitating today. So I'm wondering if maybe we can ask each of the city teams to go around and maybe summarize some of the insights that you gained from this activity. If there were certain topics that you found particularly interesting, or certain data layers that you hadn't really worked with before that helped you get a better picture of the city. Any challenges? Really, I'll leave it open, but maybe we should start with our Banjul group then. If Fabio, if there's anyone within the group that that might be appropriate to speak for no more than 5 minutes about their experience.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. So yeah, I invite people from Banjul and anything, so Fatou, Aliman, Philip, whoever wants to comment on what we have seen in the maps. I think the comments were interesting, so we could see how this information can tell us how the city is evolving, how it's expanding, if the city is actually putting pressure on natural resources, if it's expanding on areas that could be more at risk due to flooding in this case. We have seen that the city of Banjul, the greater Banjul, has expanded along rivers, so in floodplains, so putting people at risk of flooding. We also see that the city has expanded towards the mangroves area, also showing how people can be more at risk compared to the past due to the development of the city. Fatou, Aliman, anyone wants to give a final comment on what we have seen?
Fabio,
please, Aliman.
I've been lost all most of this session, but I believe what I've was able to follow in the last part was definitely amazing, especially showing the risk of flood in most of these part of the greater Banjul city. It's something that is very, very good, and that could help the authorities to come up with the best solution in avoiding those risks. Yeah.
Thanks, Aliman.
Fabio, with regards to Banjul, as you can see, Banjul is a very small city. I mean, there's no room for expanding. There's no land to expand, basically. Also, the tourism industry in Banjul is very limited, as we have, even though it's the city, but there's only one hotel. The economic activity is very vast in Banjul. That's where the ports is, which is very important. Also, one way of mitigating floods in Banjul lacks greening. The city of Banjul lacks greening. So perhaps plant more mangroves and also more trees along the coastal lines would help mitigate flooding. And being a meter above sea level is also another concern. And the municipality at central government level have to look into ways of saving Banjul, because we're talking about in a decade or two, we could actually lose Banjul as a city because of sea level. But thankfully, from the information received from you, there hasn't been any rise in sea level. We hope it stays that way for now until we can find ways of mitigating the losing the whole of the city because of sea level rising and flooding. So most of our challenge comes from rainfall, rain and flooding in Banjul. There's an ongoing infrastructure of roads. The drainage system has to be looked into as well because it's very old. Probably expanded drainage system in Banjul can also help. It's not just about the road structure, building a new road structure, but also the drainage to help with the flooding in Banjul. When you look at Tobacco Road area, which is closer to the mangrove, that's where most of the flooding and the most affected population in Banjul, that's Tobacco Road.
Thanks, Fatou. For the other in the session that don't know Banjul very well. Banjul, it's basically an island. It's a very small city connected by a road to the greater Banjul area. And yeah, we have seen how the city has expanded in the island. So basically, due to the physical structure of the city, no more development is possible there. So let's say the rest of Banjul, the greater Banjul, has expanded towards the south and the west quite a lot. So yeah, thanks Fatou for your comments, and also Aliman. I don't know if I think we should be done for Banjul.
Thank you, Fatou, and thank you, Fabio, for facilitating. And I'm realizing, Ross, if you are able to share your screen and to share we had a few discussion questions. Of course, with workshops like these, there's never time to complete everything, but I did want to invite our delegates from Cap-Vert to maybe answer, to give us your thoughts about the exercise, and perhaps focus a bit of attention on some of these more forward-looking aspects. For example, are there any infrastructure projects or other developments happening in the city that are relevant in the context of this exercise? Or are there any investments that you would like to see happen in the city that are relevant to the data? Pierre, maybe I'll pass it over to you, or if there's anyone specific within the group that you wanted to elect to speak. Otherwise, anyone is also free to give a few words. Thanks.
I think maybe Patrick took some notes, but maybe also someone from Cap-Haïtien could comment on the different projects and urbanization in the future, if you want to. We had great discussions during the breakout. Just unmute yourself. Thank you.
Et s'il vous plaît, vous pouvez parler en français, si ça c'est mieux.
You can speak in French if you're more comfortable speaking in French, because most of the participants in the Cap-Haïtien room are French speakers. Can you? Yes, we can hear you. I had a 5-minute blackout. I touched the off button of my computer. I'm sorry for that. I invite my colleagues from Haiti to flesh out anything I may leave out during this period, and for the rest, I'll start off by saying that Cap-Haïtien is the second largest city of the country after the capital city. Now, some background information given to us by Pierre to the effect that from various data layer concerning the data sets concerning the layers, what kind of conclusions could be derived. And so based on the data set on a map, decision makers can draw very interesting conclusions that will lead them to save lives in their city. When we discussed the form of the city at the beginning, we realized that it spread along the coastline, along the two major highways, spreading along the coastline, but Adeline earlier on said that there was a chain of mountains. That is a challenge with respect to the spreading of the city in a certain direction. And so now in terms of projecting growth and the size of the city in future, probably in the same direction which it has taken up until now, namely along the coastlines and along the two main highways. We noticed that towards the north, there's really no expansion, and this expansion is continuing along the highways. A speaker, I've forgotten the name, mentioned the need to define the role played by these chains of mountains as a constraint, and explaining why there is no spread towards the mountain chains. Now, in terms of green spaces, Michel Auriol made a comment, which is my take home, that these are happening outside the city. So there is no garden, there is no park within the Cap-Haïtien city. So the green spaces that you see on the map are found outside the city. Next, we talked about flooding due to rainwater flooding and river flooding and their impact on the population. All the participants agreed that the risk is very, very important. We also noticed that there is a kind of separation between the risk of flooding and the population, the concentration of the population, essentially towards the western part, whereas the risk of flooding on the map is to the east, although there can be some differences. And mention was made that the highway number 1 and the airport area are facing significant risk of flooding. Furthermore, generally speaking, the newly built up areas are now being exposed, although it was said that the highest population concentration is not very exposed, but that is not the case in newly built up areas. We also discussed important elements, if my memory does not fail me, that there were lots of construction going on in the 90s and 2010, but from 87 to 1990, these are two significant dates. And after the year 2000, there was a substantial rural population displacement towards the city, essentially due to the quest for basic services. We've lost you, Patrick. I think you've off your mic, Patrick. To conclude on the issue of basic essential services and on the issue of road infrastructure, to wrap up, Patrick, are you still with us? Have you sorted out your glitch?
Running short on time. Okay. So this might, unfortunately, the technical difficulties might be a good transition. If we wanted to, thank you, Patrick, if you can hear me, for those rich details. Okay. I'm going to mute him because I think he's very delayed. For Douala delegates, Ross, if there's anyone within the group that you wanted to give the floor to just discuss for a couple minutes. Patrick, I think we're going to have to move on. There was quite a long lapse in your connection. So
sorry, you asked me to take notes. I took notes.
Yes. Thank you.
Grace, that's fine. I just want to check. Are we going to be booted from this session quite soon, or do we have?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I've gone past, we're at the last minute now. We've just gone past the last minute and there's nothing kicking us off yet.
Okay. So maybe I'll just sum up in 1 minute, and then I'll ask anyone else from the group to share their thoughts within, also just 1 minute considering the time. No, we found some interesting discussions around the city of Douala, including sort of where and how the city has both expanded and engaged in some infill development over time, given the pressures that we've found related to perhaps some of the floodplains surrounding the city. And also highlighted, as mentioned in the other cases, in Cap-Haïtien and Banjul, the sort of dearth of green spaces in some key areas in the central areas of the city. Maybe there's a few on the outside, but this is also something to consider regarding the city's future development. And then especially how the flooding aspects really impact and complicate future development with regards to considerations like roads and future human settlements, and how to also consider other types of investments that would help mitigate the disaster, not just things like sewerage and drainage, but things that can be used, new ways of building houses and such. So I won't call it anyone specific, but if anyone from the Douala delegation would like to just share for maybe 90 seconds maximum, since the time is at the very end, please jump in.
Bon, je pense que...
Well, I think that Mark has done a beautiful job summing up what we discussed regarding Douala. For my part, there's a need to continue thinking when we will be designing our urban master plan and our land use plan, so that we know the kind of constructions that can be adapted in some areas that are considered most exposed to flooding and to hazards, so that the construction is adapted to the risk. And so perhaps we'll have to destroy constructions that have underground in some areas. So that will be considered in the amended urban master plan. Then we also noted the importance of mapping exercises in facilitating understanding of urban variations and dangers and hazards that may occur, such as floods. We do not know if the port application is accessible, whether we can have it. Can we get it free of charge through a simple application? Is it sold? So that is the only question I have for the organizers of this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I was switching between interpretation options and I missed the question. Ross, did you get it? I think the gentleman was asking about whether a tool is accessible. I wasn't sure. Oh, you're muted, Ross.
Sorry about that. Thank you. These tools are currently freely available online. At the moment, they've been developed by Fabio, and it's sort of up to him, and he's left the session, unfortunately, but to determine, to what extent, how long these will remain up there. But I will note that the City Resilience Program with which I work has developed much fuller, broader, and a more robust city scan documents in a more static format for all three cities, Banjul, Douala, and Cap-Haïtien that we've engaged with today, as well as many other cities around the world. And we are also in the process of working on building them out in a sort of way similar to what we've just engaged in a more dynamic, interactive platform. So Grace has just shared the link to our website. We normally engage through World Bank task team leaders. So if there's pre-existing relationships there, then that works best. But there's other possibilities for this in terms of how we engage. So yeah, I think the question about this specific websites will be sort of up to Fabio. But the City Resilience Program has has already some of these analyses in a full format in a more static way for all cities.
Thanks, Ross. Well, thank you, everyone. We're running a little over time, but not too bad. Thank you so much for participating. It really was a pleasure to be able to work with 3 different cities in different parts of the world and to work across language barriers. Thank you so much as well for your patience as we figured out the technical issues with using Zoom for this workshop. This is the first time we've run this workshop virtually. And while there were a few small hiccups, we're very glad that it worked out and that we were able to have some very rich engagements. There are a couple links in the chat related to City Resilience Program, and I'll add the Open Cities link as well. Please feel free to reach out to the contact who invited you to this session if you have more questions or you wanted to discuss some of this data further. Thank you so much.